In 1 Samuel 30, David and his men found a young Egyptian slave collapsed in the Judean wilderness. He had not eaten or drunk for 3 days and 3 nights. They sat him down on the sand and gave him a single cake of pressed figs and 2 clusters of dried raisins. Within minutes, his pulse returned. Within an hour, he stood and walked. Within a day, he led David's army to the enemy camp that would decide the fate of a kingdom. No physician touched him. No ointment was applied. A handful of dried fruit pulled a dying man back from the edge, and the book recorded it as if such a thing were ordinary. In that century it was. They healed differently. They cooked differently. The meal that saved a life in the Old Testament cost less than a copper coin and fit in the palm of a hand. We stopped eating these foods when doctors replaced grandmothers, and when the pharmacy aisle became longer than the produce aisle. What the prophets and widows ate to heal the body is still out there, still doing the quiet work it has always done. We just forgot how to find it. Number 16 on this list was the meal a prophet ate for 390 days, and modern nutritionists now call it the most complete food ever described in ancient literature. Number 8 was given to a man who had not eaten in 3 days, and it brought him back in minutes. And number 1 was the humble meal in the Bible, eaten by prophets, widows, and kings alike, yet it has been almost completely forgotten. These 20 meals were not medicine. They were not treatment. They were the quiet foundation of how ordinary people in the Old and New Testaments healed themselves, and food companies needed you to forget them. Hit the subscribe button. Let us count down the 20 biblical poor man meals that healed without medicine. Number 20. Barley gruel, the morning meal of every poor household from Jerusalem to Galilee. A handful of cracked barley, 3 cups of water, a pinch of salt, simmered on a clay stand until the grain softened into a thick porridge, eaten warm with a drizzle of olive oil and nothing else. A mother stirred it in one pot while her children slept. A widow made it for a sick husband because the beta-glucan inside, though nobody called it that, steadied the gut and calmed the chest. Barley is what Boaz gave Ruth, so she would not grow old in hunger. The grain that healed. Number 19. Bitter herbs and flat bread, eaten with the Passover lamb, as commanded in Exodus 12. Wild coriander, hyssop, chicory, dandelion, gathered by children in the fields and torn onto a flat loaf of unleavened bread. A mother set the herbs on the table in a small clay bowl. A father dipped the bread and passed it to the youngest. The herbs cleansed the blood and moved the liver when the liver had grown heavy from a long winter. They simply ate what the spring had given them, and the body responded the way bodies do when they receive what they were built to receive. Number 18. Parched grain and water, the midday meal of field workers, offered to Ruth by Boaz himself in Ruth chapter 2. Fresh heads of wheat or barley, not yet fully ripe, roasted on a hot iron plate over the fire until the kernels cracked open, eaten by the handful with cool water. A laborer carried it in a fold of cloth. A mother packed it for a son tending sheep. The roasting broke the grain's starches into something the body absorbed quickly, a slow-release energy that kept a worker standing in the sun until evening. What we call a power bar, what they called lunch. Number 17. Fish and broken bread, the Sea of Galilee meal, eaten every day by the men Jesus called away from their nets. Small tilapia, descaled and split, laid directly on charcoal embers until the skin blackened and the flesh pulled clean from the bone. Torn barley bread on the side, dipped in the pan juices. A fisherman's wife prepared it for a husband who came home at dawn with empty nets. The pairing was so complete that the Gospels feature it in almost every meal Jesus shared with his disciples. Protein, grain, oil, fire. The fat in the fish fed the brain. The grain in the bread fed the body. Number 16. Ezekiel's bread. The recipe is in Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 9. Wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt were stored together in a single clay jar, soaked overnight, allowed to sprout for 2 days, then ground while wet and baked into flat loaves over a fire. The prophet ate this bread and nothing else for 390 days. Modern nutritional science calls it the only known complete protein bread in antiquity. A mother made it when her husband came home thin from a long journey. A grandmother kept the jar going for decades. Sprouted, slow, complete. A pharmacy baked into a loaf. Number 15. Widow of Zarephath's oil cake. 1 Kings 17. The widow told Elijah she had only a handful of meal in a barrel and a little oil in a cruse, and she was preparing to bake one last cake for herself and her son before they died. Coarse barley flour, a spoonful of olive oil, water, a pinch of salt, kneaded by hand and baked on hot stones covered in embers. The cake that came out fed 2 people for a day. The olive oil carried compounds that slowed hunger and helped protect the heart under starvation. It was the meal that fed a prophet when the kingdom had forgotten him. Number 14. Lentil pottage. The red stew Jacob prepared in Genesis 25, for which Esau sold his birthright. Red lentils, water, chopped onion, a pinch of cumin, a bay leaf, simmered in one earthenware pot until the lentils collapsed into a thick, crimson stew. A mother with bad knees could cook it sitting down. A grandmother with failing eyesight did not need to measure. The iron rebuilt the blood after illness. The fiber steadied the gut. A single pot fed a family of 8 for 2 days and cost almost nothing. It became the engine of a body that would live 30 more years. Number 13. Honey and curds. The food of Isaiah's promised child, described in chapter 7 as the diet that would carry him into discernment. A bowl of goat milk curds, skimmed thick from the morning milking, drizzled with raw honey from a wild hive. Eaten cold at midday or warm at night. A nursing mother gave it to a child with a weak stomach. A grandmother carried it to a neighbor recovering from fever. The curds carried live enzymes the gut recognized. The honey carried antimicrobial compounds so strong that honey recovered from Egyptian tombs was still edible 3,000 years later. Ancient medicine. Number 12. Bread dipped in sour wine. The laborer's midday meal, described in Ruth chapter 2, verse 14, when Boaz tells Ruth to come and dip her morsel in the vinegar. Coarse barley bread, torn by hand and dipped into a small clay bowl of soured wine, sharp enough to make a field worker's eyes water. A reaper carried it in a cloth bundle. A grandmother sent it with a son walking to the next village. The acid in the wine opened the stomach and killed what the hot sun had begun to grow in the bread. Roman soldiers drank the same vinegar to prevent disease in the field. The quietest medicine. Number 11. Pomegranate and walnut paste. The winter food of mountain villages in Judea, when fresh fruit had ended and the nuts stored in clay jars came out. Fresh pomegranate arils, crushed by hand with walnut meats and a spoonful of date syrup, eaten by the fingerful from a shared bowl. A grandmother made it for grandchildren on long, cold nights. The punis halagans in the pomegranate, and the omega fats in the walnut did quiet, cumulative work on the heart and joints that a modern pharmacist would spend $1,000 trying to replicate. Sticky fingers, red lips, no doctor required. Pause for a moment on what this catalog is actually showing. In the Old and New Testaments, there is no separate category for medicine. No apothecary, no pharmacy, no pill kept separate from the kitchen. The kitchen was the pharmacy. The shelf above the hearth held every remedy a household would ever use. The widow did not send for a healer when a son fell ill. She reached for the honey, the oil, the curds, the bread, the herbs already on the table. The body knew how to read them because the body had been eating them every day since it was weaned. Modern medicine began when we forgot that the first healer was always the cook. Number 10. Fig cakes. The pressed blocks of dried figs that Abigail carried to David in 1 Samuel 25, 200 of them on the back of a donkey. Ripe figs dried in the sun on flat reed mats for 5 days, then pressed by the strength of hands alone into dense, dark cakes the size of a small plate. A shepherd carried one in his belt. A soldier carried 3. The concentrated sugars, potassium, and magnesium pulled a starving body back upright in minutes. The cake that revived the Egyptian slave in the wilderness. The cake that fed an army. The original energy bar, older than every brand on every shelf. Number 9. Daniel's pulse. This is the meal Daniel asked for in chapter 1 verse 12 when the king's servants tried to feed him from the royal table. Pulse was the old word for lentils, beans, and peas, simmered in water with nothing added and served with water to drink. For 10 days, the prophet and his 3 friends ate only this. At the end of 10 days, the book says their faces were healthier than all the young men who had eaten the king's rich food. A grandmother who kept to plain pulses outlived the wealthy merchant by 20 years. It was the first controlled experiment in Scripture. Number 8. Raisin cakes. Pressed clusters of sun-dried grapes, mashed with a wooden pestle into dense cakes that stored for a full year. Abigail carried 100 of them to David. When David's men found the Egyptian slave dying of thirst and hunger in the wilderness, it was raisin cakes and fig cakes they gave him, and within the hour, his spirit returned. The natural sugars entered the blood faster than any modern medicine could have acted. The potassium restored the heart. A mother kept a stack in a cool corner for the winter. When a child grew weak, she broke off a piece. Just the vineyard, pressed and saved. Number 7. Hyssop tea and bread. Hyssop is the small wild herb mentioned at Passover and at the crucifixion, the plant whose branch held the sponge lifted to Jesus on the cross. Fresh hyssop leaves are steeped in hot water for 10 minutes, then strained and drunk warm with torn barley bread on the side. A mother made it for a child with a cough. A widow drank it at dusk when her lungs grew tight. The oils in hyssop opened the chest the way a window opens a room. It is mentioned in Psalm 51 as the plant that cleansed. It grew wild on every hillside, free for anyone who knew what to pick. Number 6. Bread and garlic. The Israelites complained in Numbers 11 that they missed the leeks, onions, and garlic of Egypt, and they meant it. A whole clove of raw garlic was crushed under the flat of a knife, then smeared onto warm flat bread with a thread of olive oil. It was eaten at the first sign of a cold, a fever, or a weakness in the chest. A Bedouin grandmother kept the bulbs hanging in braids from the rafters. The sulfur compounds did the work of an antibiotic 1,000 years before the word existed. It was pungent, tear-inducing, and almost free. It was the humblest medicine in every kitchen, from Memphis to Damascus. In Daniel chapter 1, the king's steward agreed to feed 4 Hebrew captives their requested diet of pulse and water for 10 days, against the king's orders. At the end of those 10 days, Scripture records that their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children who ate the portion of the king's meat. The word we translate as fairer meant something closer to clearer, brighter, and younger. 10 days of plain beans and water against 10 days of roasted meat, rich wine, and honeyed cakes. The plain diet won visibly. The royal physicians noted it. Everyone who read it in that century already knew. Number 5. Manna wafers. The text in Exodus 16 describes manna as looking like coriander seed, white and small, tasting like wafers made with honey. It fell every morning for 40 years, and on it an entire nation walked out of slavery into a new land without a single recorded outbreak of disease. A mother gathered it at dawn before the sun melted it. A father mixed it with water and baked it on hot stones into thin, crisp wafers. The description of coriander seed is not decoration. Coriander is one of the most studied natural agents for blood sugar regulation in modern nutritional science. Perfect? Complete? Enough. Number 4. Goat milk and barley bread. The evening meal of nearly every poor household in ancient Israel. A cup of warm goat milk, fresh from the evening milking, drunk with a torn piece of barley bread. Jael gave Sisera goat milk in Judges chapter 4, and it put him so deeply to sleep, she drove a tent peg through his temple without waking him. Sedative compounds in goat milk are real and measurable. The calcium and magnesium calmed the nervous system. The protein rebuilt the body during the night. A grandmother warmed the cup. The quietest medicine a home ever kept. Number 3. Pottage of herbs. In 2 Kings chapter 4, the sons of the prophets gathered wild herbs and gourds and cooked them into a stew. One of them accidentally added a poisonous gourd. When they tasted it, they cried out that there was death in the pot. Elisha threw a handful of plain meal into the stew, and they ate it without harm. The story is usually read as a miracle. It is also a remembered fact about meal, the coarse flour of barley or wheat, binding and neutralizing plant toxins the way activated charcoal does today. A grandmother knew this. When a child ate something wrong, she stirred a spoonful of flour into water. Plain, cheap, ancient medicine. Number 2. Sprouted wheat and water. This was the food Joseph's brothers carried out of Egypt in Genesis 42 when the famine came. Whole wheat kernels were soaked for 3 days in cool water and rinsed each morning until small white roots emerged. They were eaten by the handful with water. A shepherd carried them in a leather pouch on a 40-day journey. The sprouting awakened enzymes in the grain, turning a dead seed into a living food, complete with vitamin C, B vitamins, and a protein the unsoaked grain did not carry. Sailors who did not eat sprouts developed scurvy. Travelers who ate sprouts did not. A seed, a jar, 3 days of patience. Number 1. Bread and olive oil. That is the meal. A torn piece of barley bread, baked that morning, dipped slowly into a small clay bowl of green olive oil pressed the week before. Sometimes a pinch of salt, sometimes a sprinkle of hyssop. Nothing else. It was what Boaz ate at midday in the field. It was what the widow of Zarephath had left in her house. It was what laborers carried in a cloth bundle. It was what Jesus broke and handed to his disciples, night after night, for 3 years. The olive oil carried compounds that protected the heart, the liver, and the skin. The bread carried slow grain that steadied the blood. Together, they fed a civilization for 2,000 years. The meal that healed without ever being called medicine. These 20 meals fed and healed the prophets, the patriarchs, the widows, and the working poor who built the world the Bible describes. They were not treatments. They were not supplements. They were just food, eaten every day by people who did not know the difference between the kitchen and the pharmacy, and did not need to. The body heals from the inside. Every grandmother who ever lived knew this before anyone put a name on it. The ancients did not get better because they were lucky. They got better because they ate what the land gave them, in the form the land gave it. We replaced those meals with food engineered to last on a shelf. We replaced grandmothers with marketing. We replaced 3,000 years of slow wisdom with a pharmacy aisle that grows longer every year. The meals never disappeared. A jar of olive oil costs less than a single prescription. A bag of lentils costs less than a bottle of vitamins. The knowledge was never lost. It was just buried under everything louder. The next vault opened soon.